Insults antagonize. Pope Francis cautions that freedom of expression has limits. Heartland terror. The FBI foils an Ohio man's plot to blow up the U.S. Capitol and kill government officials. Mass destruction. New satellite images show Boko Haram terrorists are leaving parts of Nigeria in ruins. And Pope for the poor. A struggling Filipino family looks to Pope Francis for help. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, January 15th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Pope Francis weighs in, commenting on the terror attack in France and the ensuing debate over freedom of expression. He addressed the issue aboard the papal plane en route to the Philippines yesterday. He says it is wrong to insult other people's faiths. He defended freedom of expression as a fundamental human right, but also as a duty to speak one's mind for the sake of the common good. And he says there are limits to this freedom. He also commented on those who give up their lives in attacks on others. He said, quote, "This person gives up their life, but they give it in a bad way." The Pope says the safety of pilgrims during his apostolic journey is of utmost concern to him. We continue our Embracing Compassion coverage of the Pope's trip to Southeast Asia. Our Alan Holdren travels on the Pope's plane, hearing the Holy Father's comments directly. Alan summarizes this unique experience for us tonight.
Brian, Pope Francis made his first in-depth comments on the Paris terror attacks today. He said that while the freedom of expression is a fundamental human right, it also has its limits. And he said that if religions are insulted, people shouldn't be surprised if there's a negative reaction. He did say that one can never kill in the name of God. He also announced that he'll be canonizing Blessed Junipero Serra in the United States in September. Blessed Serra is known for founding missions up and down the California coast. We're going to be bringing you stories from here in the Philippines for the next few days. Judging from that welcoming ceremony, it's going to be a lively time. Brian?
All right, thanks, Alan. Pope Francis receives a warm reception as his plane touches down in Manila today. Even though a strong gust of wind blows off his Zaquetto, the Holy Father didn't miss a beat. Hundreds of dancing children wave small Philippine and Vatican flags. The government has declared national holidays for the Pope's visit, which runs through Monday. On Saturday, Francis flies to eastern Leyte province. There, he plans to meet with survivors of a typhoon that left thousands of people dead in 2013. Pope Francis will be front and center on the global stage these next few days. Bishop Hubert Milo represents the Filipino Catholic Church in dealing with the media. Our Susie Pinto spoke with him earlier today.
Your Excellency, the Pope arrives today. There is so much anticipation here in the Philippines. What do you expect the Pope's message will be to the Filipino people?
You know, if I would put it in one word, presence. Simply that. Because I think his coming here would basically make us experience the presence of Christ. He's the vicar of Christ on earth, and given that we are the majority of Catholics in this Asian country, Asian place also, we realize how much we are blessed by his presence. We just want to meet him, we want to see him, and that's enough. That will move us.
And Pope Francis is a great communicator. The Archbishop Cardinal of Manila is also a great communicator. How do the Filipino bishops communicate the Church's message to society at a time when it's often misunderstood?
Well, first and foremost, I think Pope Francis said it well in terms of the pastoral leadership of bishops and priests. It is to smell like sheep. I think if we want people to encounter Christ, it has to be encountered through our presence too. And I think it is very much needed that we communicate the gospel by immersing ourselves with the poor, with those in need, the least, the last, and the lost. And then another thing I think, given this day and age, is to use social media. I think we can get in touch with young people, we can make them, we can evangelize through social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. This is very powerful today, and I find this as a blessing, even though sometimes there's a downside in social media given negative things, but this is one of the great gifts of God for us in this contemporary time.
And Bishop Milo, you are the head of the media center here. Over 4,000 journalists are accredited. What do you hope foreign media will take away about the Philippines and Filipino culture?
Simply our faith. I think when they see the sea of people welcoming the Holy Father, celebrating Mass with them, with our popular religiosity, carrying our Santo Niño statues, the statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary, you will see our faith, a lively faith. And I think that's enough. That will tell the media people how much we love Jesus, how much we love God.
Great. Thank you so much, Bishop Milo. We appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you too.
And to discuss security concerns for the papal trip, we have former U.S. Secret Service Specialist Brian Gallagher is with us. Brian is a church security expert, and they talked about this sea of people, millions, 50,000 police officers and troops have been deployed. Do you think Manila is ready for this, Brian?
I do. I think it's not just the Philippines. I think the world as a whole is aiding to help the security of this event. Remember, the Vatican and the Swiss Guard is ultimately driving the security for this event, and I believe they're working very closely with the local government to make sure things are safe and ready for the Pope's arrival.
20 years ago, when John Paul II was there, about 5 million people attended that Mass. That was a record, and now they expect to break that. What are the risks of all those people being that close to the Pope?
Well, anytime you have that many people gathered in one location, there are really two major concerns. There's security for the Pope himself, but there's security for the larger crowd as a whole. So in relation to the Pope, I would be concerned with any type of long gun threat, somebody shooting with a weapon. For the crowd, explosives are really still the easiest thing that anybody could do to hurt a large crowd. Those are the two areas I'd be looking at first.
In fact, just last week in the procession for the Feast of the Black Nazarene, there were 2 people who died, 1,000 were injured. Can they prevent that kind of a stampede and problem with this many people?
You know, prevent will vary. I think there are things that can definitely be done to stop a stampede from occurring. Specifically, fear causes a stampede, so if you can alleviate the fear, the stampede will stop. And there are practical things that can be done as well. If you have people in a large group, you can create pressure releases, breaks in the crowd, give them an area to go when a stampede starts.
In looking back 20 years when Pope John Paul II was there, of course, after the assassination attempt against him, he was in a bulletproof Pope-mobile. Right. This Pope rides in an open jeepney. That's the local Philippine Pope-mobile. That really must present security problems.
That's a huge security problems. We learned our lesson with JFK and his open air limousine. Security has to be conducted in elements of security rings and security circles. When you have a large crowd, there's no way to check them all. Putting him in his Pope-mobile takes out different security risks. I think that would be a concern that I would have, but understand his reasonings for not wanting to ride in that.
And there is an al-Qaeda presence in southern Philippines. Has there been intelligence gathering, do you think, prior to this?
Absolutely. There's been different reports that have surfaced. I can't speak to the legitimacy of them, but I know that both the Vatican is looking at all the intelligence that's coming in, as well as the other international community elements, and they're all talking. Any intelligence that's coming in, they're looking at it, they're testing it, they're seeing what they can do, and ultimately going to follow through.
And millions of us are praying for the Holy
Absolutely.
Father as well. Security expert Brian Gallagher, thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you.
Well, 3 Chinese sisters studying in the Philippines hope that after Cuba, China is next to benefit from Vatican diplomacy. Now, we're not showing their faces because these women religious hope to return to China, and they fear discrimination from the communist regime there. They'll follow the Holy Father's visit closely and then share his message with as many family and friends in China through the internet as they can. They also dream of a day when the Pope can visit their native China.
We are Chinese people. Of course, we like the Pope one day. This is our dream. The Pope also visit Chinese, the Christians, because we are how many years in China. We never that happened. The Pope visit in China, but we hope and we pray that one day you will go there.
The sisters consider their vocation a miracle. They say they grew up knowing very little about God. And And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Social media leads to an FBI sting foiling an apparent lone wolf terror plot to attack members of Congress. Susanne LaFrankie has the story tonight from Capitol Hill. Susanne?
Brian, the young man's Twitter post supporting Islamic terrorists is what led to the undercover operation. He was charged with plotting to blow up the Capitol and kill government officials. Now, this too close to home foiled plot is a reminder that terrorism is everywhere. Capitol Police remain vigilant. Tourists mindful of the increase in world terror.
That concerns me that there's so many crazy people out in the world.
The FBI says 20-year-old Christopher Cornell's plot to wage jihad against Congress at the U.S. Capitol included pipe bombs and assault rifles. The Ohio man's Twitter post sympathizing with Islamic terrorists led to an undercover sting and yesterday's arrest. Cornell was apprehended after buying 2 semi-automatic rifles and 600 rounds of ammunition at a Cincinnati area gun range.
As soon as the purchase was over and he left the door, several agents came out and tackled him here in the parking lot and took him down.
The same day, the Obama administration, acting on a presidential executive order, released 5 Yemen terrorists from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. All are suspected al-Qaeda fighters.
The prison at Guantanamo Bay continues to inspire violent acts around the globe. So it's not as if we can avoid violence by just keeping the prison open and keeping them all locked up.
Experts say as many as 30% return to waging jihad.
What connects all of the perpetrators in these instances is their willingness to be self-radicalized using social media.
Stephanie Senek-Castro, who was at the Pentagon when it was attacked on 9/11, says social media has become a major recruitment tool for ISIS and al-Qaeda. With just a click, potential recruits can connect to blogs and other platforms. Last month, al-Qaeda launched a Twitter account, gaining thousands of followers.
What this is really down to undercover operations, surveillance, wiretapping, the things that the American public shouldn't see because it really hopefully will not affect their daily lives.
The FBI says the public was never in danger. On a related note, the president is hosting British Prime Minister David Cameron. They are having a working dinner tonight. Tomorrow they meet in the Oval Office where they will talk about the economy, trade, and also terrorism. Brian?
Susanne LaFrankie on Capitol Hill, thank you. Security forces in Belgium have foiled a major attack against police buildings there. 2 terror suspects were killed in a fierce shootout. A third was arrested. The suspects immediately opened fire today as police closed in on them in an anti-terror raid weeks in the making. The group is believed to have ties to the Islamic State. Officials say the imminent attack could have been days or even hours away. More arrests are expected. We're getting our first glimpse tonight of what's left after a massive rampage by Islamic extremists in Nigeria. Jason Calvi is here now with that story. Jason?
Brian, Boko Haram overran a key military base and witnesses say slaughtered innocents. Some reports claim Boko Haram killed as many as 2,000 people during the rampage this month. Amnesty International just released satellite images showing the damage. One Nigerian town nearly wiped away, and a neighboring town crippled. Amnesty International now says Boko Haram damaged or destroyed more than 3,700 buildings last week.
Homes, they include shops, they include what schools there were, what clinics there were, razed to the ground.
Witnesses say Boko Haram terrorists killed hundreds of civilians, but the military has that number at 150 total. Emmanuel Gebe, who helps victims of terrorism in Nigeria, spoke to News Nightly about the people on the ground.
This is an extinction level type event. The people from that region are so overwhelmed that we're told they can't bury bodies and that corpses are being actually eaten up by wild animals.
The Archbishop of Jos, Nigeria, says the country needs international help.
The international community, seeing perhaps the inability of Nigeria to contain this situation, should also offer help. And this is the help we are not seeing.
Today, the White House faced questions on why U.S. troops aren't being sent into Nigeria.
These are the kinds of moral dilemmas that American presidents for generations have faced.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry spoke out against the attack, calling it
crime against humanity.
And the secretary says he and his British counterpart talked about working together to deal with Boko Haram. They didn't give any details, though. Today, the Nigerian president's office says he made a surprise visit to the state where the attacks took place. visiting his troops, and Brian, hundreds who fled the terrorists.
All right, Jason Calvi, thank you very much. Coming up, at a staggering cost of 12 lives, business booms for French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. And the nominees are, we highlight the Oscar nominations announced today. On this Thursday evening, January 15th, thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick, and for a second consecutive day, Parisians brave the cold, lining up to buy the latest edition of Charlie Hebdo. New copies of the so-called Survivors issue of the satirical magazine hits newsstands today. In some locations, they sold out in a matter of hours. The distribution company for the magazine says about 1 million copies were printed for today's release. Another 1 million are to be printed for tomorrow. They're aiming to sell a total of 5 million copies. 12 people died when the magazine's office was attacked last week by Islamic extremists. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has arrived in Paris tonight. He says he wants to express the affection of the American people for France. Tomorrow, Kerry meets with the French president and foreign minister. He also plans to visit the sites of last week's attacks.
I don't feel any other exigencies other than a continuation of our friendship and our responsibilities as good friends and the longest ally in our history.
Kerry says he has no plans to apologize for the lack of a high-profile U.S. presence at Sunday's Solidarity March. The White House later acknowledged it had made a mistake. Dozens of world leaders and more than 1 million people marched together in support of France. Well, beginning tomorrow, Americans traveling to Cuba will find it a whole lot easier. The Obama administration announced a new set of travel and financial rules today. Cuban Americans visiting family, American officials, and journalists on assignment no longer need government permission to visit the island nation. The looser restrictions also apply to some tourists. For the first time, Americans will be able to use credit and debit cards in Cuba. Limits on bringing goods in and out of Cuba are still in place. The White House says it's working to set up a U.S. embassy in Havana. A federal judge rules Michigan must legally recognize several hundred marriages of same-sex couples. They were performed last year during a brief window when a different federal judge struck down Michigan's same-sex marriage ban. An appeals court then suspended that decision, blocking any additional ceremonies. The U.S. Supreme Court could decide tomorrow if this case will go on its calendar in time to be argued and decided by late June. 2 extravagant comedies dominate today's nominations for the 87th Annual Academy Awards. Birdman and The Grand Budapest Hotel each received 9 nominations. The Grand Budapest Hotel is a surprise heavyweight in the most money-making Best Picture entry. The Best Picture favorite is Boyhood, which took the top award at Sunday's Golden Globes. The independent film, 12 Years in the Making, gets 6 nominations. Last year's Academy Awards show drew 43 million viewers, the most watched entertainment telecast in a decade. Up next, doctors said he would live like a vegetable, then die. But this young man is alive, married, and remembers everything. And our Susie Pinto visits a struggling Filipino family, hopeful that Pope Francis will help them out of poverty. We're very grateful you're joining us this evening for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Interesting story of a man who recovered after living 12 years in a so-called vegetative state. It's back in the news this week. Martin Pistorius was diagnosed with a degenerative disease when he was just 12 years old. Doctors said it would leave him with the mind of a baby and less than 2 years to live. Within 18 months, the boy was in a wheelchair and could no longer speak. But after 12 years in this vegetative state, he recovered. He is now married and says he was able to understand everything during those 12 years. Arina Grossu is director of the Center for Human Dignity at the Family Research Council. And Arina, what kind of misconceptions exist around people in this so-called vegetative state?
Well, first we just have to understand that people in the so-called vegetative state are not vegetables. They are people, they have brain waves. In fact, there was a study done where a healthy volunteer and a person in a vegetative state were asked the same questions and the same parts of the brain lit up, which shows us that people in vegetative state can have brain waves, can think, and we are not aware of that, but we have to remember the dignity of the person.
Yeah, and never call a person a vegetable.
Right. We have to find a different term.
But certainly there was some despair here. The doctors, even his mother, really kind of lost hope. How important is hope in all this?
Well, he certainly had the will to live, and that showed in so many ways. The fact that he tracked the shadows on the wall, the fact that he was able to reframe the ugly thoughts, and also he had the support. His family was there for him. His dad took very much care of him. And then the woman who took care of him that realized that he can actually understand, she saw something in him, and that unleashed the power so that he could go back and get tested again.
What a powerful story. But let's discuss some of the ethical issues that you see and what we can learn from this situation.
First of all, everyone has human dignity, and it's not based on whether they have the mental capacity or if they're useful. We are full of dignity because we are made in the sacredness and this image of God. And so that's first and foremost. And second of all, medical personnel have to make sure that they don't initially diagnose and then cast away someone based on initial diagnosis, because that's very dangerous. Third of all, food and nutrition, cleanliness, warmth are basic needs that every human needs. And so providing people in a so-called persistent vegetative state with those basic needs is what is required, minimal care. Just the way that Terry Schiavo died because she died because of dehydration, not because of her vegetative state.
Well, I'm sure God will use this young man in a powerful way, just as he's using you. Arina, thank you for joining us. Well, Pope Francis plans to deliver a message of hope to the Filipino people, especially the poor and marginalized. Tonight, our Susie Pinto visits a Manila family with high hopes for the Pope's visit this week.
Nestor Tejero is a father of 6. Like so many Filipinos, he and his wife Josler struggle to make ends meet.
At times, we have nothing to place on the table because that day I wasn't able to work, so to earn money for my children. This is one of the struggles we have in our everyday life.
Despite not having much, the couple is cheerful, and the family is happy Pope Francis is visiting their country. But they hope for something tangible.
If I could ask Pope Francis, I would really request for him to give us some sustenance, some material help for our daily needs. It's not really for me, but what I think of is my children.
One of Josler's children has special needs. His name is Ernesto.
I think especially of this child of mine, the male, who is mute and has to commute every day to go to a special school, and at times he cannot go because we have no money for transportation, so I'd really like him to be able to study.
The church is helping the family through its relief agency, Caritas Manila. It gives scholarships to the Tejero children and sells goods and appliances at prices they can afford. For the priest who runs Caritas, the challenge will come after Francis leaves.
The fervor of the Catholic Philippines, even non-Catholics, with this papal visit will hopefully turn into a concrete call to action, and hopefully strengthen and organize the mercy and compassion theme of the Holy Father into something concrete, developmental, sustainable, impactful.
20-year-old Erica dreams of getting a job one day and helping her family. When asked what she'd say to the Pope, it's clear she feels the weight of her parents' worries.
To help us.
Brian, according to Caritas, over 50% of Filipinos describe themselves as living below the poverty line. But they'll be getting special treatment at the Pope's final Mass this Sunday. Father Pascual tells me 500 urban poor will be sitting in the VIP section. In Manila, Susie Pinto for EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Susie. We'll have much more from Manila tomorrow. For EWTN News Nightly team here in Washington and in the Philippines, I'm Brian Patrick, and we leave you with a taste of Pope memorabilia and other souvenirs on sale in Manila. Good night and God bless you.